It's quarter time in federal politics. Both houses have risen and won't reconvene until the May budget. The coalition continues to hammer themes that have worked since the 2010 election, particularly the carbon tax. It might not be pretty, but it has been pretty effective. The Prime Minister scored a big win this session with the passage of the mining tax, an important part of her pitch to win the economic argument. Labor's also keen to reconnect with its base, pushing its plan to prop up Holden as a symbol of its worker-focused values. Political editor Heather Hewitt.
Very occasionally, political sides do come together, and so it was on this final parliamentary sitting day before the May budget. A soccer match to raise funds for the homeless, but then it was back to business as usual. More government handouts for the car industry, namely $275 million for Holden, though the Prime Minister preferred to give her funding package another title.
This is truly a strategic co-investment, not a handout.
In the 156-year history of Holden, I have to tell you, this has to rank as one of the most significant days in our company's history.
We're encouraged that this may lead to more manufacturing jobs, and that's a good thing. What we do have many questions about is the government's funding, because we know the single greatest hit to the car industry is the $460 million hit from the carbon tax.
It's a theme that's never been far from the lips of every opposition frontbencher and their leader for the duration of this parliamentary session. And today wasn't going to be any different, with another opposition attempt to suspend standing orders in the Parliament to debate the carbon tax.
That this House calls on the Prime Minister to apologise, because in breaking her promise not to introduce a carbon tax, she is compounding the world's highest electricity prices.
We have lost 27 hours of question time, 27 hours as a result of their shutting down of question time. That is enough time to watch all the Harry Potter movies, all 18 hours, to watch the Lord of the Rings trilogy as well.
It might possibly have been more entertaining than the daily diet dished out to us by both sides during this parliamentary session, but as it drew to an end, the Prime Minister seemed pretty happy with her lot.
Mr Speaker, at the start of this parliamentary session, the Leader of the Opposition said he wanted to debate the economy. Well, on this side, during the parliamentary session, we've continued to work on the economy, securing the future for Holden, getting the mining tax through the Parliament, passing the means testing of the private health insurance rebate.
This Prime Minister is making a bad situation worse with a carbon tax based on a lie.
So on this final day of the session, we asked a few of the experts to take a look at how both sides are faring, the political wins and the losses for the opposition leader and the Prime Minister.
I think the carbon tax is still going to bite her. I think the mining tax is still quite a problem with some of these related issues going to come back at her through the states. The spending, the waste and the boat's still coming. I mean, it's basically the same agenda we've had now for the last 12 months.
They had to hit the carbon tax hard because it was so fundamental that a Prime Minister promised to not introduce it and then did. You don't leave that stuff lying around, but it won't run them to the next election, so they now have to develop something beyond.
Well, I think the government will be very pleased with how this session has gone. I'd probably give the government 6.5 to 7 out of 10. They've got some important bits of legislation through.
They get a fairly good mark for surviving. I mean, they are passing their legislation, which is legislation that Labor and the Greens want. So you have to give them marks for continuing to govern. I mean, I don't particularly like their legislation, but hey, they're alive, they survived Kevin Rudd.
You can slam the door too. Look at that.
The government has had a busy and reasonably successful legislative agenda so far this year, with a few notable exceptions. It's had to delay its pokies legislation because independent Andrew Wilkie is unhappy with the wording, and the Greens and the opposition have declared they'll unite to block tax cuts to big business arising from mining tax revenue.
What you'll get under us are tax cuts without new taxes. What you're getting under Labor are tax cuts that are funded by new tax
taxes.
Why is he constantly saying no, Mr Speaker? Well, because he believes that Gina Rinehart and Clive Palmer should get a tax cut, not struggling Australian small businesses.
Have a good day? Yes!
It's a line the government has hammered day after day, but will it have the desired impact on the electorate?
Envy plays in politics. I think for the aficionados, we think that it's all a bit, ho-hum, but I think it probably does hit in some quarters. But at the same time, Labor's in a bit of a mess on the mining tax. Let's face it, the whole thing was a compromise.
There are still danger times ahead for the Prime Minister. One of those is coming up this weekend. Looks like Labor is going to struggle to make any sort of impact in the Queensland state election. And there's still the matter of the introduction of the carbon tax.
I'd like to see the opposition now move into the next phase, which is to begin to talk about how Australia could become more productive. Inevitably, we're going to have to debate industrial relations, and Tony Abbott will have to get over his concern that that opens up the play for Labor.
I think they've got to pick and choose. I'd like them to be a bit stronger in some areas. Obviously on workplace relations. I think on the paid parental leave they should dump that myself. I don't think they will.
The opposition is constantly taunted by the government about its policy costings and has had moments when its economic team don't always seem to be on the same page. But it insists most policies are completed and add up. They just won't be released until closer to the election, one that both sides know will be fought on economic credentials and the hip pocket nerve.
Unless they can see a much better economic performance in the next 12 or 18 months, she's still basically under the hammer and likely to go at the next election.
No, it's not a hopeless case. Only the two-party preferred vote counts, and Labor's only 6 points behind. Now, I'm surprised at that. Labor's probably surprised, but the fact is it's not an insurmountable gap.
And one that both sides will be seeking to address in their favour when the Parliament next convenes for the May budget.
Heather Ewart reporting.